Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Stacy, and I'm here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, where we are going to talk today about how you would create an exhibit like the one that you see here behind me. Maybe not on such a grand scale. There are a lot of smaller exhibits that we have here at the aquarium, but we're just going to talk about what are the things that you're going to have to consider when you either build a new exhibit or how to maintain your current exhibits. And this is something that might be of interest for any of you who are interested in having an aquarium of your own. Of course, a home aquarium is going to be a little bit different than an aquarium like we have here, but there's going to be a lot of similar principles. Now, the exhibit that you see here behind me, this is our Blue Cavern exhibit, and it is a model of a real dive site in Southern California, right off the coast of Catalina Island, which is actually pretty close to us here in Long Beach. Now, we wanted it to look a lot like the real Blue Cavern, and have a lot of the same types of animals that are in it. So we knew that we wanted an exhibit, what we wanted it to kind of look like, and also the kinds of animals that we wanted inside of it too. And then of course we had to really think about what that all means. So what I would like you to do is think about what are the things that you would have to consider when building an exhibit. What are the things that you have to think about and try to plan for? Okay, so take a few moments, think about that yourself. If you have somebody in the room with you, that'd be great to talk with them about it, because discussing things, it's always a real great way to know a little bit more about what you're talking about. You can write down some notes and some thoughts if that's something that you would like to do, or you can even share it with us. So we have a text line right here, 562-286-1838. You're welcome to text us any questions you might have or thoughts that you might have, and we'll try to talk about that together. All right, so there's your text number, 562-286-1838, and data rates may apply. So make sure if you do need permission to text that you do ask for that permission. All right, so what do you have to consider when building an exhibit? So I'm going to kind of step out of the way so you can observe the exhibit. Now this exhibit here, again, we wanted it to look like the real dive site. And the real dive site has algae, kelp in particular, giant kelp. And you can see that here. We do have quite a lot of giant kelp. Now the giant kelp that we are using inside this exhibit is artificial because we know a little bit about kelp. And kelp is a little bit particular. If conditions aren't totally right, it doesn't do very well. But when conditions are perfect for kelp, it can grow up to 2 feet in a single day. So that means that we would really have to kind of garden inside the exhibit too. So we are using artificial kelp. Fish don't seem to mind. They use it the same way. So that was something that we had to consider. All right, so we had to know a little bit about the place that we were trying to recreate. What were the things that you would naturally find there? What are the different qualities of that area? So knowing that sort of thing helps us in designing an exhibit like this. Another thing is that we are part of an organization called AZA. AZA is short for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And there are many zoos and aquariums that are part of AZA. And this is a really interesting organization where you actually apply for accreditation or apply to be a member of this association. So they have a lot of different criteria that you have to meet in order to be an AZA institution. And that was definitely something that is important to us. So we designed this aquarium when we first opened to meet the standards that AZA has set for zoos and aquariums. And they do have a lot of standards. All of those standards are science-based. And so there's been a lot of research done that looks at what kind of animals do well in aquaria like this. What kind of animals do well with each other. And so we're able to take that information and from there expand it into the place that we call the Aquarium of the Pacific. So AZA has been very, very helpful. And then the knowledge and experience of all the staff that have come through our doors has been really, really amazing as well. And so all of that kind of combined together is how we got this aquarium. Now let's take a quick look here. We've already been talking a little bit about this exhibit, Blue Cavern. I think I'd like us to maybe venture into another habitat, another exhibit. And let's talk about this exhibit design. So I am not the only person here in the studio today. If you've been watching, you probably know that there are a few of us here to make this program run. So I'm in front of the camera, but behind the camera is Alicia, and she is the person in charge of showing us all the beautiful stuff that you see, all the images that you see. She's controlling that computer. And then I have Amanda helping me out as well. She is taking all of the questions that you might have. She might answer some of them via text back, but then she'll also be writing down some of those questions for me to answer here on our program. Oh, good question. So I'm curious which exhibit you're thinking about. I have a feeling that the Blue Cavern exhibit was the one that we were looking at earlier. That's the kelp forest exhibit. And the fish that are in there, we actually have a lot of different fish in there. Kind of the ones that really stick out are giant sea bass. Giant sea bass are a really important part of a kelp forest. And the giant sea bass here can be very big, just like the name giant suggests. And the giant sea bass that we have are pretty big sized. Not right now, but earlier on in the day, they actually do kind of come down, or even at night, they come down to the camera and look at it like that. So then all you might see is just giant sea bass face. So they take up a lot of that exhibit in that respect. But giant sea bass are in there. We also have some smaller fish like sardines. We have Garibaldi. Garibaldi are the California state fish. They are bright and orange. They really stick out in that exhibit. There we go, Garibaldi. They really stick out because they are the brightest fish in that exhibit. But they are definitely a part of our local ocean ecosystems, especially the kelp forest. They have little attitudes, so that's pretty fun. But there we go. Here's our giant sea bass. And you'll see back there, that's a half moon. We have some senoritas. We have... you can kind of get glimpses of the sardines up there. We have a barracuda in here. So there are a variety of different animals that we have in here, but all of those animals would naturally be found in a kelp forest ecosystem. Oh, look, California moray all the way in the back there. And then, of course, our leopard sharks. So, excellent question. All right, we have another question. Does a giant sea bass hide from predators? Oh, that is a fantastic question. Now, when you get to be this big, you're kind of one of the biggest things in the kelp forest. So it's less needed for them to hide. However, they still have fantastic camouflage. Look at the coloration of this fish. It really blends into the shadows of a kelp forest. The speckling, the spots on it even help it to blend in a little bit better. The colors that you see on it, the top of it is dark and the bottom of it is light. That's actually another way to camouflage, because the top of it, if you were above looking down, the top of it blends in with a darker ocean floor. And if you were underneath it looking up, the light-colored belly blends into the lightness that you get from the surface of the ocean when the sun shines in, so or even moonlight shines in. So it actually does have fantastic camouflage. Now, when it's more important for them to hide is when they're little, because when they first hatch, they're itty-bitty. They're like basically microscopic. Hi, little one. So at this stage in their life, they absolutely need to hide, and they're pretty good at it. That's one of the reasons why kelp forests are so very important. Kelp is usually pretty lush. In fact, you have lots and lots of kelp all together creating a forest of kelp. And that gives a lot of places for small fish, including young fish like this baby giant sea bass here, to hide. So they can hide among the leaves of the algae, the blades. They can hide closer to the bottom. They can hide among rocks. So there's lots of spaces for them to hide. So when they are small, they definitely need to hide because a lot of things are bigger than it. And those big bigger fish and everything would probably try to eat them. But once those giant sea bass get very, very large, there are fewer predators that would go after it, a little less need to hide. All right, great question. All right, so let's get back to our other exhibit here. So this exhibit is our clownfish exhibit at the aquarium. Now, you may notice that this exhibit looks very different than the one that we just saw, okay, our kelp forest. This is warmer, tropical. What are some things that you can see that are different? So you may not know that it's warmer because you can't touch the water, but it is definitely a warmer exhibit. But what are some things that you see in here that are different than the things that you saw in our Blue Cavern Kelp Forest exhibit? Now, again, if you want to share that with us, you're welcome to text in 562-286-1838. You can talk among yourselves if there are a few of you in the room, or you can also write them down or think about it in your head. Either way, all the ways, they all work. So some of the things that I noticed that are really different is that there's a little bit less open space. And that's most likely because there's a lot smaller animals in here. This exhibit itself is much smaller, and the animals are much smaller. These animals actually prefer tighter spaces because they are smaller animals that need to hide more. So they need more rock structure. They need all of these sea anemones that you see everywhere. All of those different things are required for these animals to thrive. So really understanding not only what you want to see in your exhibit, but the biology of those things, the algae, the animals, the whatever it is that you want to feature in your exhibit. You really have to understand their biology, their behavior, their needs in order to make sure that you can create an exhibit where they can thrive. Now, some of you might be looking in here and notice this orange basket. It's a weird looking thing inside of a beautiful exhibit. But this orange basket is something that we use. We also have, black baskets and, different colors and everything. But this is something that we use to introduce new animals to a space, because all of these different fish, they know each other. They've been living with each other for a little while. They're like, oh, hey, I know you. We're cool. You're part of our group. When we introduce a new animal in, we need them to get to know each other, but in a protected way. So we call this thing kind of like protected contact. We can put a new animal in here, and then they can interact with each other through the holes in the basket and not worry about them hurting each other. Eventually they get to know each other and they're like, oh, you're fine. We know each other. We're cool. And then you can release them into the exhibit to live with everybody else. The other reason why we might have that in there is if there's an animal in this exhibit that needs some extra care or attention. Maybe it is sick, maybe it got injured, something like that. Then we can actually leave them in the exhibit. We don't have to pick them out and then put them somewhere else. We can leave them in the exhibit and treat them right here, but it'll be easier to find them. Especially when so many of the animals might look really similar, or if it's a really big exhibit, it would be hard to find that one specific animal. So having them in a smaller area for a short period of time can actually help us to care for them. So we learned a little bit about aquascaping, which is basically building your exhibit to not only look really cool, but to meet the needs of the animals that you see there. So some of the things that you need to consider when you aquascape, you need to make sure that all of the shelter that animal might need is there. If the animal doesn't need shelter, like say a jelly, for example, then you don't need to have the shelter there. In fact, if you had a bunch of rocks in a jelly exhibit, the jellies might get injured. So you want to make sure that like the furniture meets the needs of those animals. Another thing that you have to consider is how are you going to feed all of these animals? Because you need to have access to feed them all. How are you going to feed them? Are you just going to sprinkle something on the top? Do you need to get inside to go individually to each animal? Can you reach the bottom if it's an animal that doesn't move? So those are some things to consider. Also think about cleaning. Cleaning is a really big deal, right? So what are you going to have to clean and how are you going to clean it? And then, of course, in an exhibit like this, we want to make sure that guests who come here can see the animals that are featured. If we built this with rocks all the way around, you wouldn't see any of the fish and anemones. And there's no point in that then here at this aquarium. So we made sure that there is an opening or the window where you can see in, and that when we design it, it looks appealing from that window. So lots of different things to consider when you aquascape. Now, this exhibit in particular is a coral reef exhibit, but the coral in here is real. And the coral is a really interesting creature. It's actually an animal, and it's a colonial animal. So they live together. In this one piece right here, there are, gosh, thousands probably of little animals that are all connected to each other, and they live together. And what they actually do to kind of create this structure is they push out of their bodies, they secrete a calcium carbonate skeleton. And so if you've ever seen coral after it's not alive anymore and it's kind of been out for a while, you might see that hard, rocky, white structure. I think I might even have some coral here that I can show you. Here we go. So, so this is kind of what it might look like when it's no longer alive. But this itself would have tons and tons of animals just living on it, and that's creating this one piece of coral. And so, like I was saying, they have to create this white skeleton for them to live in. And they need calcium in order to do that. So a lot of our coral exhibits, like the one that you see here, if it has live coral, we actually have to add calcium. So things to consider besides just the parts that you can see and the living things inside that exhibit are things like the chemistry of the water. So making sure there's enough calcium if the animal needs calcium in order to build their body when they grow. So that's really important. Other things you need to consider: what water temperature do those animals need, and how can you maintain that temperature, especially if you're outside. If the exhibit is outside and the air temperature changes, we need to make sure that we maintain the water temperature. So how are you going to do that? Does that mean you need to have a bigger exhibit because that means it'll be more stable? And sometimes that's really the key to it. You just need to make the exhibit a little bit bigger. Tiny exhibits might not do as well when there are big temperature changes. Other things you might need to consider: how salty is the water? Some aquariums are freshwater. We actually have a couple here, at least one. And then some of them might need slightly different salinity. So something that you need to test for to make sure that the salt is correct in your water. Even looking at things like the pH, so how basic or acidic the ocean water is. We really need to do that for anything, especially that breathes that water, because they're pulling it into their bodies past their gills, and that's really sensitive. And so if the water is too acidic, it can actually injure the animals. If it's too basic, it can injure the animals. So pH is something that we have to test. And and then of course we have to look at lighting. So some animals live in really bright areas. And if you remember the corals that we just saw, they actually need that sunlight because within their tissues are little microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. And those zooxanthellae are producers. They take the energy from the sun and nutrients from really the corals that they live in, and they can create their own energy. And that's really important for the corals because they're creating energy for themselves, the zooxanthellae, the algae, but they're also giving some to the corals that they live in. So we need a really bright exhibit like this in order for those zooxanthellae to thrive, helping the corals thrive too. Now, on the other hand, you might have some animals that don't really do well in light. There are even some animals that might sunburn. And so then we would have much dimmer lighting. Now take a look here. What are some things that you notice that are a little bit different in this exhibit? There are some similarities, right? I see similarities in that I see lots of rocks. I see anemone-looking critters. I see fish. But it is a little bit different. Now, these creatures right here, these critters, they live more in a sandy bottom area. So if it's a sandy bottom that they need, then they're going to need a lot of space flat and sandy. And maybe just a little bit of rocks for the handful of animals that might want to hide in the rocks, like the fish or the crab. Okay, so you might notice we do actually have some flatfish. Here's a flatfish right here. I believe there might be another flatfish that's hiding really, really well. And those really like lots and lots of sand. And so that's where they're going to be hiding. And we have some other animals like this fish right here that likes to perch. Okay, so lots of areas for them to kind of move around too. Now, one thing that you don't really know about this exhibit is that it's cold. This is one of our northern exhibits. The water is very chilly, and all of these animals are typically found in a really cold part of the ocean, or a cooler part of the ocean, which is why we need to make sure their temperature matches where you would naturally find them. That is what they are adapted to. So we've talked a lot about all the different things that you need to consider, but one of the things that we didn't talk about yet is filtration. Now, you don't really see filtration from the front. In fact, this is what we see from the front, and what you really look at are all of the different animals that we're trying to feature here. You might notice sometimes the drain of the exhibit, the part of the exhibit that makes sure that the water can go back behind the scenes where we house all of our filtration. Now, some of the reasons why we keep our filtration away from all the animals is number one, the animals could get caught in the filtration and could get injured. So you want the filtration in another area. Number two, it doesn't look very good either. So you definitely don't want to get the animals injured. You want the area, the exhibit, to look really nice as well. So oftentimes we have a behind the scenes area, and that's where you would find all of the filtration. Now, there's different parts of filtration, and each exhibit kind of has their own needs. Basically, though, every exhibit that we have here has three different kinds of filtration. It has physical filtration. It's taking out large chunks. I know it sounds kind of gross, but leftover food, the fish poop that's kind of a little bit, not dissolved into the water, we need to get that out of the water. And if it's a touching exhibit, especially if it's outdoors, there might be leaves, there might be hair, there might be lots of things that we need to get out of the water. So water then from the exhibit goes in these big tubes, and then it goes into this sock or this bag. This is called a filtration bag. And the material is pretty thick, and the weave is pretty tight. That way the water gets through, but the physical bits stay behind in this bag. I actually have a cleaner filter bag here with me, and this is what it looks like. So you can see it looks very similar. So the pipe would dump the water straight in the top here where the hole is, and then the water then can seep out. They'll catch things inside here, and then all you need to do is take this out and clean it. Okay, so it's actually a very simple way to catch some of the bigger physical parts in the water. So that is physical filtration. We also have chemical filtration. Chemical filtration can be something like a carbon filter, and that can use chemistry and chemical reactions to filter or clean the water. All right. And then the other thing that we use is biological filtration. Now, you might be wondering how that works. Biological filtration. Bio means living, right? Well, we're talking about bacteria. Bacteria that can break down things that you don't want. So when animals eat, they also have to go to the bathroom. That's just the way that it is when you're an animal. And when they go to the bathroom, when the fish go to the bathroom, it is ammonia, basically. And if there's too much ammonia in an exhibit, it can be really bad news for anything that lives in there. So we have these towers and towers of biological filtration. Oftentimes you'll find things like this, okay? These, we call them bioballs. Basically, there's lots of surface area on this one little tiny ball, and the surface area is there so the bacteria have a place to hang out. And so you'll get a whole bunch of these all together in a whole big tower, and the water runs through it, and all of those bacteria then are breaking down that ammonia into something called nitrites. Nitrites are not as bad as ammonia, but we still don't want too many nitrites. So what's really cool is bacteria also breaks down nitrites into nitrates. Now, in the ocean, nitrates would typically be taken up by the producers, okay, by algae, phytoplankton especially, seagrasses, anything that kind of needs like fertilizers, right? So nitrates are great for that. They are what gives them the nutrients they need to create their own food. Now, here in the aquarium, we don't have too many exhibits that have live algae. So instead, we do a water change. And so we would never take all of the water out of the exhibit because the change would be very dramatic. So we take out some of the water, and then we put in some fresher water that doesn't have as many nitrates in it. So this exhibit here is our Amber Forest exhibit. It is right next door to Blue Cavern, our other kelp forest exhibit. It's showing some of the smaller fish that you might find outside of the sardines, some of the smaller fish that you might find in a kelp forest. And an exhibit like this, of course, would have all those same kinds of filtration, and it would also need those water changes just like the other exhibits that we have here. Now, we also have this very interesting contraption. This is called a foam fractionator or a protein skimmer. The name protein skimmer might give you an idea of what it does. It basically skims out the proteins. Now, it works a lot like a jacuzzi in that the bubbles are bubbled, or air is bubbled into the water. So a little bit of water comes in, air is bubbled in. Protein loves bubbles and attaches to it. And so when you get a whole lot of bubbles, when there's a lot of protein, maybe you just fed the exhibit, maybe the animals really had to go to the bathroom, then all those bubbles will then bubble up and out into this top chamber here. And then this tube will take all of the bubbles that bubbled up here when they pop and they become more liquidy, then they drain into this tube right there. Now, the other thing that we have to do sometimes is actually take a scrubber and just scrub out all of the top chamber here. And that can then clean up all that extra protein that was in the water that could make the water quality bad. So that's why you have these foam fractionators or protein skimmers. Now, the ocean does this too. Have you ever been to the beach and along the shore you see lots of bubbles? It's the same thing. So those bubbles are created when the ocean waves churn the water, right? It's putting air into the water, creating bubbles, and the proteins stick to it, and then you get all these bubbles. So now you know when you go to the beach and you see all of that foam that it's protein from the water. You know what I mean. Okay. So protein skimmers are really, really important for filtration as well. So it takes a lot to run an exhibit and for all of the animals within an exhibit to be healthy. But the people who do that really care about the animals and they want them to survive and they want them to thrive. And so they do all the things that they need to do to make sure that they stay nice and clean and healthy. Now, when you have animals that are not only living in water, but also going to the bathroom and breathing that same water, it is really, really important to make sure that the water itself is nice and clean. And that's where that filtration comes in. We even have a water quality lab here at the aquarium. All exhibits, all holding areas are tested at least once a week, some even more frequently, especially if we've found that it has a problem and we want to fix it. So we test it frequently while we're trying to fix it to make sure we're on the right track. So we test the water in all of the exhibits here at least once a week just to make sure it is in top quality for all of the critters that we have living here. It's a pretty amazing job that our team does, and it's pretty great to see what results from all of their hard work. Well, that does it for us here, talking about how you would create an exhibit and how you would take care of our animals. If you have any more questions, you are welcome to email us at live, L-I-V-E, at lbaop.org. So live at lbaop.org. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.